raised.
Sorry. Forgot that I did that. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start all over. But anybody have Nebraska roots or any of that? Okay, a few. I see about half. Oh, I see the whole room now. But so Nebraska, and so I hope that you would respect the fact that I am a serious candidate for the United States Senate from Nebraska, albeit I am an underdog. And as an African American, I am uniquely and historically someone that we've not done before. And if this were a campaign speech, I would tell you all the reasons why, but they are rooted in the subject for tonight, voter suppression. Not because of voter suppression am I running, but all of this is rooted in voting. So it's worth letting you know that I am a candidate. I just a little background. Some of you will like my background and some of you will not. Would you all like me to lead with the things that you won't like?
I didn't get that. Could you try again? I figured as much.
I don't know if you could hear that, but that's the automatic part of a computer where they think you're trying to tell them to do something for you. Yeah. And they jump right in the middle of a speech. Isn't that amazing? But I'm going to go ahead and give you the bad news. And if any of you all want to leave, it's okay. But I used to play football for Nebraska. We got one standing up and two getting
Never
ready.
beat guys, but we tried.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I played for Nebraska, but I believe we played South Dakota State, maybe, in one of our early games. And so if you were there, you would definitely stand up because we weren't kind. We were. But I went to the University of Nebraska, graduate from there. I spent years with IBM and years as a private business person. But I want you to know that my background is part of why I'm speaking. I can tell you that you didn't need to pay me the exorbitant fee that you paid me. I think it's exorbitant. Do we still have a deal? No, never mind. But to speak on the subject, because you could maybe go to any barbershop or beauty shop, somebody could sit in my chair and give a speech about this subject. The difference between them and me probably is that a lot of this I have taught as a university professor. I have studied because of it, but I've also, besides being a student and a scholar on the subject, I have had a good portion of my adult life living as they say in Martin Luther King Day, during that period, living the dream. I lived and worked with most of all of the iconic people during the civil rights era. I have a unique experience of having been with those people and have lived part of the struggle, but I also am the recipient of so many firsthand stories from great people. How many of you know the name Andrew Young? Most of you. So are these all university students with you?
No. There's a couple. There's a good mix.
Oh, okay. Because, with Andrew Young now is 91. And so I would say that it is very much possible, and I run into this all the time, of people who have not heard of people that I think everybody knows. Andrew Young, I was with Andrew Young in the 80s when he was elected mayor. For those of you who don't know, just very briefly, Andrew Young was one of the very inner people in the inner circle with Martin Luther King, not just with his entourage, but the inner circle. He went on after Martin Luther King was assassinated to become a congressman. And then under Jimmy Carter, he was the ambassador to the UN, with some wonderful stories there. And then he went and became mayor, two-term mayor of Atlanta. And he is a statesman of great proportions now in this stage of his life. I worked with Andrew Young during his days of being mayor. I worked very closely with the King family, Martin Luther King's dad, Martin Luther King's sister, his children, his wife, Coretta. The King family, within a month now, lost one of theirs as Dexter Scott King, his youngest son, recently died at 62. Now, does anybody have a calculator on them? Well, don't reach for it. I want you to throw them away until I get through speaking. That's what I want you to do. So, or hide them. Because as soon as you hear me mention some names and some years, I know you're going to sneak in your pocket and calculate how old I am. And I'm going to do that. Because Dexter King died at 62. And I knew him. Don't get your calculator. I knew him when he was just a young man. That's amazing. Time has passed. I know I don't look older than 22 on Zoom, but I am. But yeah. So, and I could take up a lot of time talking to you about those people that I knew well and worked with well, who were the icons of the civil rights movement. And so I've got to turn my phone off while I'm talking. Otherwise, you might think that some of the things I say have caused people to ring my phone. Okay, so I have done that, but I would add another name. How many of you know the name? And maybe a little bit of history. Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson? Someone from the audience, give me the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Jesse Jackson.
He ran for president.
I'm sorry?
He ran for president.
He ran for president in 1984 and 1988. When he ran for president in 1984, I'm the guy who laid out the campaign on a yellow pad and ran that campaign from start to finish. So I worked with Jesse Jackson. I did not work with him in 88. So I'm just trying to make a point that I'm glad you didn't go to the barbershop or the beauty parlor to have someone talk about voter suppression. I am an expert, probably, on the subject. And it's a thrill to be able to share just my thoughts for you on voter suppression. I want those of you who are detailed to take a close look at me I don't have any notes on me. I just know some of this stuff, and it's my pleasure to share with you. I'm hoping to make some of it interactive. For me, I've been given 5 hours to speak. And so I think some of you looked at your friend sitting next to you. Is that true? No, but we'll have some time together. And I hope that I can share some knowledge and experiences, but get to the real in a way that you can maybe learn a few things, but also we can have a good time together. I surely want to put in my reservations to come up and be in Brookings some other time, maybe as a United States Senator. Won't that be fun? And so let me just create the environment for you when we talk about voter suppression and all of its parts. And I would ask that someone take a chance, and I promise not to embarrass you, to just venture one example of maybe when voter suppression started. Anybody want to just have relaxed response to that?
1793.
What year?
1793.
Oh, that's a university professor's response. Well, you're not too far off, because it is my learned contention that most, even I'm doing the best to kind of average the age of you all. My gray hair is not real, but I see some people who have real gray hair. I just acquired this gray hair for this presentation, give myself a little credibility. But a lot of us think voter suppression. You ask that question, you get a lot of answers. You could get the 1700s, as someone in the audience said. You could get some of, there's discussion that slavery was the kind of involved in voter suppression. It's not thought that way by everyone. They separate slavery into a different set of facts and attributes and problems, but they don't usually put voting in there. But there absolutely was voter suppression during slavery period. And some people began to say that voter suppression may have really become clear after the Civil War. Some people felt that voter suppression started during Jim Crow era. Some people feel that voter suppression started after, before, during, and after the Civil Rights Movement. Some people think voter suppression started with, oops, I almost mentioned somebody's name who I can't say, but or that voter suppression is rising its head now for the first time in the era that we live in. Let me just say off the cuff, that's not true. It's been going on for a while. May I just take kind of a lecture approach to this little talk of mine and walk you through a very cryptic, bulletized version of history of a field of facts that merge together. And part of the merging elements are voting. and try to paint a picture where we can really get real clear on key things for you to know about the cycle of voter suppression. I think that I could make a case, if asked, to begin, as my friend who spoke up said, in the 1773 or 1700s. There's people that say it all started in 1619, all of that. But I'm not. I'm going to ignore that reality because I don't want to suggest to you that I'm not aware of if you are enslaving people and not allowing them to be even full citizens. How many of you, maybe I should say, are aware that as the country began, that by the 1800s, that African Americans, slaves, not African Americans, but slaves, and I say that in quotes because there were people who were enslaved. I don't like it when people talk about slaves as if that's who they were when they were born and that's who they were when they died. They were people and they were enslaved. Please note that. But that if you have people that are enslaved and they're working for food, they're not really not working for food. They were working to build wealth in businesses, but they weren't considered full citizens. Of course, that is voter suppression of a citizen, in spite of the fact that they weren't considered. How many of you know that early citizenship in America and the census and all the things that we do to determine things, some of which related to voting, some of which related to other things, that slaves, people called slaves, were only considered to be 3/5 of a person during the count. Raise your hand if you do that. So this is a learned group. A lot of people are not aware. And I say that seriously. A lot of people are not aware of that. 3/5. And so, yeah, so that's was as it related to the count, but none of those people were able to do what, and they weren't considered a full citizen, so they weren't given the right of full citizenship. And so you got to kind of know that when we talk about voter suppression, you got to know it on the front end just to understand the big picture. But I want to start serious talk about when it became a subject of discussion, not that it was a fact or not a fact, but the subject of discussion. And that is when many people, they end up being called abolitionists, were fighting and what have you. I'm talking about the pre-Civil War. Even then, there was a group of people that grew in number and in volume who were calling for the abolition of slavery. And some of that discussion trickled down to voting, but it was above that voting talk for most of that discussion. It was simply that people should not be held slaves. And so let's put a pin in history and say that discussion reached the point until the mid 1800s and then 1861, when the Civil War began, where there were the southern states who, in a funny kind of way, and I have trouble making myself clear when I say it had nothing to do with race, but it did have something to do with race. It had to do with a lifestyle, and it had to do with free labor. That's what that lifestyle and that free labor was able to create wealth and success for business owners. And they did not want to change it. They did not fight the idea of having slaves because they wanted to degrade a race. They didn't consider it an issue because they were less than citizens, to some degree, less than human, and different enough where the people, the humanity side of it, was not the discussion. The discussion is, how dare you remove my free labor and the lifestyle that we've gotten accustomed to in the southern states. Therefore, we had the Civil War. But what was embedded in all of that has to be pulled out in maybe three pieces. One is the humanity of it all, the audacity of it all. Two was the rights of the people who were enslaved to have the rights of a citizenship that maybe the Constitution had in mind, but it was not being practiced. And then lastly, the rights of a citizen to do things like voting. That was embedded in all of that. And you all know, because you're the smartest group I've ever spoke to, but you all know about the things as the war evolved. You all know about when the president decided to take it upon his own strategically to end slavery right in the middle of the war about slavery. That was very provocative and a strategic move that could very well have backfired, but with the Emancipation Proclamation, he did that because the war, and so many people who know things think that that was the end of slavery for real, but they've forgotten that technically that's not true, because first of all, it was like a executive order. Secondly, the war was still going on, and there was not a assurance that the country, as we know it, was going to win. It was a strategic move, the proclamation, and it wasn't until the war was over that the three amendments were created. So bear with me. I'm saying to you, all of that is leading up to a crescendo when, if you want to focus this history that I'm giving you on voting, and we are and will. But out of the war came three amendments. And I would risk destroying this meeting and throwing it out and see if you all can name the three adjustments to our Constitution. Somebody throw out one of them.
No.
What was
13th Amendment.
the 13th Amendment? Say it strong. You got it. It's the 13th Amendment, which officially eliminated legally slavery and some other parts of it. but slavery. The second one, that was the 13th Amendment, and that was in 1865 after the Emancipation Proclamation. A lot of people get that mixed up, think they are the same thing, and they are the same, they had the same powers. But that's the first one. The second one, anybody? Well, one thing to make this question easy is the 13th Amendment was followed by two others. So so even the most brilliant among you could end up knowing that the next one was the 14th. But the 14th Amendment and the 14th Amendment adjusted and tried to fix the idea that slaves and others were 3/5 of a citizen and say that all were full citizenship, no matter what your color and creed and all those things. That's what the 14th Amendment did. And the only reason why the 14th Amendment was passed is because somebody said, in 2024, we're going to need that. No, that's another lecture. So the 14th Amendment, and then the last one, the 15th Amendment, is part of the root of this discussion of the cycles of voter suppression, because the 15th Amendment was focused on I'm asking my host to do a quick count. How many men, how many women in the room?
5 men, 8 women.
Okay, I'm going to take a risk because don't show anybody where the off button is. So here I go. This is going to be fun. So in the 15th Amendment, all people were given the right to vote. Well, listen, the 8 are speaking. I love doing that. The women, you can see, yeah, no, it was only given to black males. It took 50 more years before women were given a right to vote. For the record, you talk about voter suppression, what about that? Don't forget, when you're talking about voter suppression, to include that segment. Don't separate the right to vote for blacks from the right to vote from women. It was half of our population for 50 years weren't given a right to vote. My goodness. After the 15th Amendment in 1870, it was 1920 before that happened. Don't let that slip through the cracks. And so voter suppression was present prior to those 3 amendments. And the 15th Amendment in 1870 blew that wide open, because now these slaves and others who have given their full citizenship and to some degree rights constitutionally now had the right to register and vote. May I ask this august audience, what happened right after that happened? Any guesses?
They added a bunch of clauses and barriers. I don't know.
Now, who said that?
Hi.
All right. Now I want you to come sit over on the right hand over there. Yeah, you're going to sit, because that's not what happened. That's what 90% of people think happened. You're going to be right, but not right now. So relax. But what happened is very key to understand that Black people registered and voted like crazy. No impediments, as you were trying to say. They registered unencumbered almost and voted like crazy. What's the evidence of that, Mr. Speaker? The evidence is in your history book. If you go and look at the makeup of Congress and the makeup of the United States Senate, there were as many almost Black people in Congress and in the Senate as in the 1870s and 80s as there are now. Because they registered and voted pretty much unencumbered because of the 15th Amendment. Then, after a few years of watching that, is that a question?
Well, we had federal troops where a lot of the Black men were, and now we've got federal troops and National Guard and Reserve troops on the Rio Grande, Texas border, and they're
Hey, Ken.
enforcing things, and there's all
Hey,
kinds of
Ken, can we
code
save
lines.
some
The
commentary for that?
question is, are we helping people who deserve to be helped?
Hey, Ken, can we save that, any questions and commentary to the end, okay? Thank you.
I'd love to talk about it, but let's finish the run here because that is a reality that the gentleman raises that we don't want, we're not trying to avoid. We're just trying to let me earn my little pay for, for voter suppression. But okay, I want you to get the point here. And so Blacks registered and voted, and the evidence is that Blacks were in Congress, the United States House, and a few senators from the southern states during that period. And may I ask you to reflect on what was the problem with having African Americans register and vote as citizens? Was it because of their skin color? I need a guess from someone.
Probably not so much as the policies they wanted for people that never had any rights before. It wasn't the cultural norm.
It was not the social norm, and it was you have the right first letter, but I think there's more, it's a different word than policy. It was the loss of power that was the pushback.
Right.
If you have a community that has all of the elected officials in your area, come on. They don't want to give that up. I mean, I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about any people. You know, it's just natural that they would push back on a new era that would allow some other group to share or even take the power. And the reason why Blacks were able to take the power because they were so dominant in the numbers. They had more people. And so it was easy to elect somebody to go to Congress. That's why. And so that power shift was not something that society in those southern states were willing to do. And so the successes I want to make was happening during a period of our history called the Reconstruction. The whole country was in the period trying to reconstruct itself from the war. And part of that reconstruction in the Black community was trying to get their footing on the things in society that they weren't able to do prior to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And so therefore, there was voting like crazy and the success of it all. And so that continued for a decade or so, and then all of a sudden, and this is a very important part of your kind of lessons, if you will, on this voter suppression. It had been, and it basically was dissipated by the 15th Amendment and by the participation of the new citizens, the excited new citizens, and they voted and all of that. But it became a problem, and I want you to hear me, because there is a pattern that began right there that we see up until now. That pattern basically was that what emerged out of that Reconstruction period was a period that you all know and read about or know about, which is Jim Crow. It pushed back on all three of those amendments. It pushed back on slavery in a way to make slavery, to do things that enslaved people that wasn't called slavery, but it was pushed back on the 13th Amendment. And then there was the rights of a citizen to have equal protection under the law and all of that. There was pushback on that. The refusal to consider an African American or a Black to have regular citizenship. You all know the stories about public accommodations, universities, even water fountains that were separated by race and not treated equal. All of that was a pushback on the 14th Amendment. And then on the pushback on voting, drum roll, was voter suppression. And so voter suppression became a way to reduce the impact of greater numbers and a new group of people trying to register and vote. Voter suppression was the solution. Let me give you 3 or 4 examples of Jim Crow voter suppression. No, I'll take it back. I'm throwing it to the audience. Let's come up with 2 or 3 voter suppression measures to reduce the impact of the Black vote. Anybody?
Gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering. Does anybody need a quick course in gerrymandering? Come to Nebraska.
Literacy, read and write, sign your name to understand what you're being required to agree to.
Okay, somebody, I couldn't get it clearly.
He said literacy and
Literacy test. Requiring before you could vote to do some unthinkable things as it relates to literacy, to recite the Bill of Rights and not miss a word or punctuation, things like that. You're not literate to vote because you can't do that. That's 2 good ones. Any more?
Poll tax.
Poll tax. All right. That means in order to register and vote, you pay a tax. The idea there was that the people of color were not of means. They weren't able to pay the tax, so they couldn't register. I will add a couple more that you didn't mention. Grandfather clauses. All right, we all know that your grandfather, if your grandfather voted, you can vote. Well, wait a minute. My grandfather couldn't vote. He wouldn't, but that's okay. But if you can prove your grandfather voted, you come right on in, and all of that stuff. And then you left out a big one, and that is intimidation and violence. That was another one. And there were more. And I want you to know that I wrote a book, one of my books, and I listed out my list from this era of voter suppression techniques. You just mentioned some. There's about 7 or 8. Do you know if I need to do it, if I would do a new version, that number probably is 20? It's gone to all kinds of things to suppress the vote. Let's take one example of today's wonderful voter suppression thing. Let's see here. How about let's close half of the polling places in places where the opposition votes. That seems simple enough. Let's just do that. And what does that do? Well, if you close the number of polling places, you're going to have the result is you have longer lines, you have confusion. It happened here in my county. It was purposeful, all of that. And people will be people, and they're just not willing to stand in line. So you lose a few and all of that. But guess what? I think it was Texas or Georgia passed a law that said during the summer of the month and people are standing in line, guess what happens?
Can't drink water.
They get thirsty. So you cannot bring a glass of water to somebody in line because you would be breaking the law. That's number 21 on voter suppression. There are so many things I could go on for the rest of my time and just list the new voter suppression techniques that have popped up since the Jim Crow era. So I want to say this. And so the civil rights movement was a conglomerate of people and actions that then affected and pushed back against Jim Crow. It pushed back against indentured slavery, which is getting people to do free work because they owed debt when in fact they really didn't. They used to pick up people on the corner, charge them with crimes, give them large fines, and then say, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll let you work it off in the cotton fields. That got around the law. And also other little things about the 14th Amendment. But in the case of the 15th Amendment and all the impediments, the suppression things, the civil rights movement pushed back on that. And after, so much pain and so much death in the civil rights movement, there were 3 pieces of legislation that came out of that. The impact of the civil rights movement was, okay, here we go. What were the 3 big things that came out of the civil rights movement? Anybody want to guess? You all are doing great. And so when this lecture, if you want to call it that, when this talk is over, should I get everybody's name and put the grade on it? Yeah. Very good. All right. So somebody, let's come up with the 3 big pieces of legislation coming out of the civil rights movement.
Civil Rights Act of the 1960s.
Yes.
Voting Rights Act.
The 1965 Voting Rights Act was one. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was the other. And the 1968 Fair Housing Act. Those are the 3 big ones that came out of. And so back to the core of this talk, the one we want to focus on is the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The 1965 Voting Rights Act was a masterful a piece of legislation that dealt with all of the evolution and the impact, negative impact on voting by blacks that came out of Jim Crow. It made all of that illegal. It gave court and subpoena power to the Justice Department to deal with it. It put the southern states, required them to get approval before they did crazy stuff like gerrymandering and all, any change that would negatively affect free registering and voting. It was all packaged in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It was a masterful thing. And guess what happened? The same thing that happened in the 15th Amendment happened in 1960, which was 1870. It happened in 1965. Is African Americans again began to freely be able to register and vote without all those impediments. And then an explosion of the Black elected officials and so forth came out of that legislation, which came out of the civil rights movement. Okay, that could be, ladies and gentlemen, my final testimony on voter suppression. And it should be, but it's not. After the 1965 Voting Rights Act, deja vu, blacks began to register and vote like crazy, and then they began to take office as mayors, county officials, congressmen, senators. All of that, you must understand, was not by chance. It all came from the evolutionary process that I just walked you through. And then I told you when I introduced myself that in 1984, I was Jesse Jackson's campaign manager. But let me tell you just a little side story. But I need to check we need to check the clock. How are we doing?
Oh, you're doing A-okay.
Okay.
You have some time. We don't close till 8.
Has the sun gone down in South Dakota?
Yes.
So I'm going to bring it to a close, but you've got to hear where we are now and how we got there. I'm talking about right now. And so I need to tighten this up, is because, okay. And so after the 65 Voting Rights Act, black folks voted, and then you saw some incredible victories that were not doable in people's mind. Black candidates won the elections in very large cities. The one historically significant was in 1983. Anybody know who that was? Uh-oh, I have victory. I've stumped the panel. In 1983, you need to understand, was a pivotal, significant election. We elected Harold Washington in Chicago as the first black mayor. Now, why was it so significant? Because it really represented an incredible migration from all the way back, as far as you want to go, that a city that large could elect a mayor. And also that go back, there's a dotted line from 1965 Voting Rights Act to 1983 in that victory. Not only that, in 1972, we had, for the first time in modern history, African-American run for the presidency. Anybody know who did that? A black woman, by a congresswoman by the name of Shirley Chisholm. She ran She was from Brooklyn, New York. She didn't do well at all, but she broke the cycle, if you will. And then in 1984, Jesse Jackson became a serious candidate for the presidency of the United States. And that is the reason I want you to hear me. Whether you agree with my analysis, there would be no Obama presidency had it not been for the Jesse Jackson run for president, because it was like when I was at University of Nebraska, I ran track. And at that time, sometimes I was a high jumper. And so I remember during that phase, nobody could jump over 7 foot. Nobody. It was out of the question. And then one day, a little later, a guy jumped 7 foot. And then all of a sudden, people were jumping 7 foot all over. And now, they're inching up, higher and higher. But my point here is a serious one, is once Jesse Jackson ran, he was like a high jumper who just jumped 7 foot. Now, if you jump 7 foot, you could come in fourth. And once he did, then it opened up a whole nother world, and that world produced Obama. And he became the recipient of all of that history, tied up, simply stated. However, what happened is the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, that happened in 1870 was followed by Jim Crow, and Obama was followed by a tremendous organized pushback against him and everything that he stood for. And I would make a statement to you that could be controversial, and that's okay. Obama is partly his candidacy. It was what struck a new path for America, and we started to become not only divided in policy, but we became divided and divisive because people couldn't relate, and people were able to organize people around anti-Obama and everything he stood for, even healthcare. And all of that has started us down the road of every possible reversal of all of this history that I've given you. I'm so sorry to have to propose to you that's where we are. And so we live generations with the two parties being divided, but they work together when necessary. Excuse me. I don't know if that's on your screen, but okay. And all that, but now we've become divisive. And the gentleman mentioned things about the border. I would propose to you that on the border, the solutions are right there, but nobody wants the other side to get the credit. And so we're only now in America, in most everything at the congressional and senatorial, we're only worried about whether our side wins, whether we solve the problems or not. That's a problem. We are not willing to come together and solve the problem because who will get the credit? So we would rather the solution get defeated than our side being defeated. That's part of the problem. We've got, in the case of the border, it looks like a pretty good solution. It's not perfect. It's a bipartisan, so-called bipartisan, but there's enough people on one side who say, no, we don't want that to happen because we don't want to give victory to the wrong side. That's where we are. I'm so sorry to propose that to you. I think you already know. So here we are in 2024. And what's happening now is that who's the guy that invented the light bulb? Uh-oh, you guys are really old. You're forgotten who invented the light bulb.
Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison. I'm saying the ways in which people are inventing ways to suppress the vote now are greater than the inventions of Thomas Edison. How's that for a quote? They're just incredible because we're trying to stop one side from winning and we're willing to break the law and all of those things. There's a whole nother subject we could get into. So I'm proposing to you as I close my short comments. And I say, that was my introduction. Now let me give you my speech. Okay, nobody laughing? Okay, so let me just say that I hope that I gave you a historical context for voter suppression. The context is as important as the now pretext, but also of the effect of all of it. The idea of the cycle has not been a pretty picture. And I don't know how we're going to unravel this into a greater democracy and a greater America. We've gone too far. And I'm hoping that the three political parties, what'd you say? Three? I thought you said there was only two. Well, there's three. Yeah.
The vote with not working with the African Africans, with the Asian Asians, with in particular the Latinos of Latin America? Should we be working more with them?
The short answer is absolutely. Yes. If I understood your question, I'm an African American and voter suppression is rooted in the African American experience, but it's not African American only, if that's what you were saying. No, it is about any group of people getting full use of democracy and all these pieces. And where we concentrate surely needs to be altered and grow. And so I hope I got the sense of your question, but I surely think I totally agree with you, but it wasn't easy for me to hear every word. But so let me just say this as I throw it open. You started the kind of a dialogue, question and answer, if you will. And if you want to repeat your point so I can get it more clearly, I surely will give you my best shot. But I surely hope that the subject of the cycle of voter suppression is more profound to you than maybe on the surface as we are now. And so I would close by the comment that what I'm afraid of in Nebraska and afraid of for America is that we've created so many gaps along so many lines that I'm really running for office with the contention that we need to have somebody, some people, some part of our congressional delegation that are looking to try to bridge gaps and not trying to just win for what side you're on. Thank you so very much.
Hey, well, we will open it up for questions if y'all have any. If you could raise your hand and either speak really clearly or you can come on up because the camera that has the mic is over here up in the front. So
Have you got any proposals on how we can bridge this gap you described?
Okay, what I heard is, do I have any proposals? And then help me, somebody, on what the,
To bridge the gaps that
Oh.
you described.
it's a mindset. Yes, my proposals are abstract because the challenge is abstract, and the solutions are abstract. But yes, I have in Nebraska. Let me just use Nebraska. Let me first just give you three gaps that we have. We have the gaps of rural and urban, big time. We got the gaps of party, Democrat and Republican. We have the gaps of race. And all three of those, I have taken initiative to try to bridge them. I have done some things that are unique and controversial in my community to reach out and build relationship in what's rural Nebraska, and we've been successful. And the formula, if you want to call it that, has to do with people getting to know each other better and realizing, well, we're not that different. We got similar. That's that. On the political side, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not the Democrat just and whatever else. Who cares? I just want the Democrat. No, I just am focused on, for example, at the border, solutions. And those solutions are not going to happen if both parties are on different sides. I'm willing to step to the line and try to work something out. It probably will mean that everything that my party seems to think is the right way won't get done. There'll have to be compromised. And I've done that most of my adult life. And as it relates to race, the same thing. So very much it is a mindset that drives my service. That's a good question, sir.
Any other questions? Come on, I know you guys have questions.
I was just gonna make a comment about the states that recognize the abolishing of slavery. Wasn't Mississippi the last state to
You saying South Carolina? I mean South Dakota?
Mississippi was the last state.
Oh. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that Nebraska had a tough time. Our state was ratified, verified, became a state in 1867. We start trying to be a state for almost 10 years, and the issue was slavery, because you had to declare from going from a territory to a state, you had to say that you were a state that didn't approve slavery. And Nebraska had a tough time with that. And there were some free states connected. And it was very illustrious stories of that. I wrote a manuscript, that 55,000 word manuscript about the history of some of that. That's why I have gray hair. But I don't know who was the last or who was on the trail end of that. But I don't, and it would have been interesting for me to look, but you to look up and see what year that South Dakota became a state, because one of the biggest issues for all the states becoming states was whether or not they were willing to say our Constitution makes slavery illegal. That'd be fun project for somebody.
In South Dakota and probably in Nebraska as well, there are some voter suppression issues related to Native American folks and reservations, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah. And there's some impediments for felons. after they've done their time. And there are now the easy ones, and I'm feeling the pain of voter ID. Nebraska in the past legislature voted voter ID, and I'm feeling the pain because we're trying to get people out, registered and vote, and the requirements are tedious, and the people who are advocates of voting, we're getting beat down with all the little nuances and how easy it's going to be for so many people to be who will drop off as voters because they couldn't get through the rigors of voter ID. And in the case of felons, every state can define their own rules. In Nebraska, I think Iowa, I'm not sure, but I think Iowa, if you cannot vote until you're released from prison, but as soon as you're released, then you can vote. In Nebraska, you got to wait 2 years, and in some cases longer than that. So those are some real time. Voter ID, some of the things like that are prevalent in Nebraska and maybe South Dakota.
Any final question?
Mary, are you having any controversy in Nebraska about absentee voting and ballot harvesting?
About what kind of voting?
Absentee voting and ballot harvesting.
We
We have groups here in South Dakota that are fighting that and questioning that.
They're messing around right now in Nebraska, trying to reduce and make it harder. We don't call it absentee voting anymore, as you well know, but early voting is absentee voting. That was the child of absentee voting. They're trying to take it backwards, make it harder. By the way, remember I said there was maybe 21. I started with 7 suppression things. Now they're up to 21, 22. But one of them was incredible during the last administration, where they tried to reduce the movement of, they tried to get the post office to hold up votes, before they would deliver the votes and all unbelievable on that. But the answer to your question is there is now popping up as the new challenge for us to have to fight is just that. The ease of people having a ballot sent to their home, they fill it out, put it in the mail, and send it back. They're trying to reduce the time frame, trying to reduce the methodologies, all to make it more difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult here in South Dakota with the reservations. People may not have vehicles or they live hundreds of miles from a voting location.
Yeah. And
to deny them that is to deny them their vote.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? Just think about an election at the local or national. Do you realize that 2 or 3% is a big, if you can suppress 2 or 3%, you'll change the election. It doesn't have to be 20% or some great number to change. All it has to be is just a little piece here, a little piece there, and voila.
Any last question? Ken?
You haven't mentioned Wall Street and its role in all of this.
I heard Wall Street. What was the rest of it?
He said that he is interested in hearing about Wall Street and their role in voter suppression.
Well, I think I don't. Let me just say this. Really, I don't know directly. I don't have a study or knowledge of a example, but I do know this. Just like in the days of slavery, anything that will dissipate the power of, in that day, the corporate plantations. And in today's day, corporate getting its way is that you can predict who would vote for corporations. I'm talking generically. And so, yes, you will look, and let me tell you, the answer to that is if you follow the money in these campaigns, you will find out where money can affect the election, and the reverse of that is suppression to the other. Let me just say this. I'm running against a billionaire. And so I'm at a disadvantage just because of that. And if we get to the point where we're debating issues that is kind of overly advantageous to corporate, there'll be more money going against my opponent than me. That's unfortunate, and I'm drawing a line between the concept of Wall Street to corporate. But it's we got to get a handle on money and politics, because I'm going to raise enough money to do all the things that other candidates do, but I'm not going to have enough money to just bombard you with ads, attack ads, other kind of ads, and pay for people to do things they wouldn't normally want to do. That's where corporate can be a villain. They can be, yes.
Should we be welcoming people not only who have good immigration paperwork, but also even those who want to be part of us from anywhere, who even have proven that they want to be part of us, and they have some kind of argument that they would help us? This is people from all over the world. Should we be open?
For voting, Ken? Or just in general, like immigration in general, or immigration? If you could clarify, sorry. I guess Ken is asking, should we be open to further immigration? Is that what I'm getting?
Yes, any group in the world who wants to come here and be part of us. Should we find a way, maybe not tomorrow or next year, but to welcome that people group?
Well,
and the vote comes with that eventually.
Yeah. Well, it's a scenario. I don't know that we're faced with that particular problem, even though yeah, intellectually I hear you, but practically that's not the problem we're facing now. We're facing a problem now that is bigger than us, which is the state of affairs in other countries, and the people, not as it is described, that all of those people are trying to smuggle drugs, trying to do bad things, they're criminals. There are a few of those, yes, but the people who are just trying to escape genocide and horrible life conditions, and now these countries are corrupt with drug production and violence and all of that. These people are used as tools, and all of that means people are trying to escape. And we are somewhat of a beacon of light for people, but we haven't prepared ourselves for this challenge. We're trying to figure it out. And so, again, I think we are forced to figure it out. And if we can get less partisan and work together, we'll begin. It's not overnight kind of deal. We'll begin to figure out a way, because it turns out that whether they're all from all over the world or from the southern sector of this hemisphere, we could use workers. And so how do we balance all of that. It's a complex problem. And anybody who stands up, sticks out their chest and says, here's the solution, be careful, because it's not that easy. And let me just say this, and I appreciate the gentleman, some good, very good questions. I'm going to say to my hostess, I have to part. I have believe it or not, 10 minutes to get myself together for another big meeting.
Well, you get out of here.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
I've enjoyed, being in South Dakota the way you do it these days. Just zoom right in. But and I would say I'm going to be telling my friends and family how smart the South Dakotans are. They had answers to questions and stuff. I would hope that you would consider having me again, either this method or maybe sometime I'm up north in Nebraska. I can shoot on over and say hello, but I surely enjoyed my time.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Next week, we will have Simon Naguru from 254 Gift Shop, talking about his entrepreneurship and his immigration from Kenya. And I hope to have you all here.
Great.